Is the distribution, or the way of distributing all these things. They are all different tools, but they all, at the end of the day, are gems, which there's some advantages for doing that. We have versioning, we got easy distribution with all of them. Plugins, essentially, it's a gem that's specific to working with a Merb app. So we just call them plugins because in Rails, that's what we called them. So if you have something that does filtering for you or does some tasks that you use in a lot of different applications, you can just call them plugins. But really, you're just talking about a gem that is specific to Merb. Slices, as you guys have already seen a talk on slices, so I don't really need to go too much into that. They kind of, it's a full Merb stack, as you know, and it's distributed by gems, but it's a whole nother animal in your Merb app. And gems, well, they're gems. And, you know, there are often things that you can use, you know, in a lot of different Ruby applications. So it's easy to freeze stuff in Merb because we use just the gem system. You can really freeze anything. And what this does, if you were to run this, it essentially is a whole gem system in your app. So when you fire up Merb, your Merb's going to look locally, then it'll look globally. So if you were to run this, it will install the dependencies. It behaves just like gems. So the important key is the -i gems. And if you wanted to freeze Merb, the whole thing, you could just gem install Merb -i gems, and that will put the whole thing in your gems, and you can remove them the same way. So basically, I think getting started in Merb, I think the most important part to look at is just the configuration. So most of this talk really kind of deals with your config folder. Database YAML should be pretty self-explanatory. Rack and router, I'm not going to really cover. Like I said, rack is for your servers, and routers, well, we've seen a talk on that, so why get into it. Dependencies and init, that's the important thing. This was, just until recently, this was all init. So your dependencies essentially is just requiring your gems that you want to use, and you can put versioning in there. As you see in init, the first thing it does is require that dependencies file. So that's just basically to clean some things up. As you can see, you can specify your ORM. And this init is taken right off of the Merb stack, which is, I'll show you how to get started with Merb stack in a moment. But essentially, it gets you started with DataMapper, RSpec, and ERB. That could be Haml. That could be SQL, or you could use no ORM by commenting that out. Is there any questions about this file? You can require things before, you can require things after. My apologies if this stuff you've already played with. That's actually a really good sign if that's the case. So the Merb stack has been talked about a lot today. And essentially what that is like since 0.5, which was kind of a lightweight Rails that was a full stack, they broke it up into Merb Core and Merb More and have really modularized everything, and which has a lot of advantages, but there's an obvious disadvantage, and that is just getting up and started really quick. The wow factor, the building a blog in 5 minutes kind of thing. So the opinionated Merb is kind of, if it were to be, or the Merb stack is like if Merb was opinionated, this is more or less how it would work. So it's essentially going to give you what you see here, helpers, an ORM, which is DataMapper, some authentication. It's really easy to get going on authentication. Right out of the box, it's going to assume you're using SQLite, and I'm not sure where jQuery plays into it right now, but it is, I guess you could say, the preferred JavaScript library. So gem install Merb is going to give you the whole stack you need, so you get going really quick. And the rake file essentially, oh, I should explain, the Merb is just a meta gem. So there's no actual framework code in it. It's just requiring these gems. So like I mentioned earlier, for freezing gems in your application, if you were to freeze Merb, it would, unless you explicitly say not to include dependencies, which wouldn't make sense in the case of Merb because it's a meta gem, it would grab all of these and freeze them all in your application. So to get going in the Merb stack, you would simply Merb gem an app, in this case my blog, and you could create a resource, an article resource, and run your migrations. In this case, it's an auto migrate, and then run your server. You of course have to set the resource in your router, and don't be afraid to get rid of that default routes if you're not using it. You can catch your errors in however way you want. You could have a specific route, of course, to handle that, a catch-all. And the Merb stack also gives you a user class. You can remove this if you'd like, but it's going to assume that you want to protect some resources. So because we created an article resource, we have one here, and excuse me. The before authenticated is a before filter that the Merb auth slice uses, and so you'll have to add that in there, and just add that to any resource you want to protect. And by default, the provides is commented out. But that's more or less what a basic resource looks like. There'll be a far more extensive talk on DataMapper, but the transition, like the philosophy or API, is very similar to Active Record as far as how to query things. And yeah, I guess like the philosophy differences is more under the hood. So deploying is pretty simple. I haven't looked into the master process and how that plays in exactly, but generating a cluster is very simple. And of course, don't forget your Nginx or your Apache. And that's pretty awesome. So. All right, so there's a few tools that can help you out. Dr. Nick is maintaining a TextMate bundle, which you can just put in your library TextMate folder in bundles, I suppose it is. And that'll give you all the helpers that you're familiar with, like with Rails, with DataMapper and all that. Wiki at Merbivoir, we really need to really kick it up. Yes?
So regarding the wiki, we actually worked on a wiki during the Merb sprint. We are working on a new wiki that's going to replace the old one.
Okay.
And we're going to try to put it live as soon as possible, and we will need help to actually get a lot more documentation than what we have. But the one that we have right now on wiki.merbivo.com is still the old one. So just want to make that.
This is still the old one?
That's still the old one.
And when's the new one available?
Well, we need more help to get that ready. But if you want to see it, it's print.merbivo.com right now.
Okay.
And we're gonna have this one still. It's gonna be available as an old wiki, but we were trying to move everything to the new wiki and get all the documentation ready for 1.0 final. So that's the goal.
Yeah. So I mean, this is your tool to use, but it's also your tool to build. So I mean, I imagine everyone's going to be going through a lot of the same questions and same troubles and triumphs at the same time. So contribute what you learn into this wiki so we can all benefit from each other's mistakes and or benefits. The IRC channel is great. I mean, if you can't find docs or can't find anything in the wiki, hop in there. Rarely do any questions go unanswered in there. It's at irc.freenode.net. There's a Merb channel and DataMapper channel. Until we get going completely on, until the Merb 1.0 is deployed to Ruby Forge or GitHub, I'm not sure where it's hosted, but until the gem's available, the best way to get it is through Thor. And there's a good tutorial at Merb Unity for getting going with Thor. And it's basically a system tool built with Ruby. Thank you. Are there any questions? That's good. Okay. The suggestion was that the...
I didn't catch the link from the new wiki. It's just put it on the old wiki so you can find it.
Right, so we're going to do that as soon as we're ready to do it, so before 1.0 RC goes. So. But if you go to sprint.merbevo.com, it will take you there. We're going to put a link on the old one.
Okay, so if you didn't catch that, a link to the new wiki will be added to the old wiki.
But the URL will change anyway, so when you will go to wiki.merbevo.com, it's going to work soon.
Okay.
So I'm brand new to the whole Merb world, and it looks really, really great. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of converting a Rails app into a Merb app. I mean, I'm sure that's a more involved process and can be done in a couple minutes, but maybe some of the tools or, what pitfalls you're likely to come across.
Okay. Well, that's a good question because I think a lot of people are thinking that right now. Perhaps you just started a Rails app last week or something. You're already starting to think about changing it. I've changed a few over, and for the most part, like you can use Active Record in with Merb, and I don't discourage you from doing that, especially if you're coming directly from Rails. Excuse me, my voice. I've had a cough for like ever. Anyway. The major pitfall I've ran into is plugins. As far as the model and the controllers, like the model transfers over 100% if you're using Active Record. So, I mean, that's one trouble that's right out of the way. If you're following really good conventions and you're putting a lot of your logic in the model, as far as your resource goes, you're at a really good start because you can just transfer your models directly over. Your controllers, you have to explicitly call render after each action, which has some advantages. I'm not sure if anyone's going to get into that this weekend, but you can call render or display depending on what you're trying to do. So I guess in a Rails controller, your respond to block would get...
So sorry, tomorrow we have actually a talk about that. So we're going to have a panel. The Merb core team will be answering this kind of question.
Okay, there's a Rails to Merb talk, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question quickly, plugins have been the only real struggle. The rest transfer over quite smoothly in my experience.
Michael Ivey created this really neat gem that you can get off GitHub. I think it's called Merb Has Rails plugins, and it allows you to suck up all your Rails plugins as long as they don't have a lot of controller stuff. But like you could use Thinking Sphinx, or I used Ultra Sphinx. I use Thinking Sphinx now, but a lot of Rails stuff is immediately available in Merb as long as you're okay with doing that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And essentially all that plugin does is it just acquires a plugins folder. So, Yakuda's got more to say about that.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that, but that's a path to insanity if it doesn't work right away. No, if it works right away, that's great, but if it doesn't, you should probably consider immediately starting to port it over to the proper format because, yeah, it's not really a supported thing at all, so.
So it's possible, but it's discouraged.
What else you have is that you have a lot of the plugins that are implemented for Active Record actually are ported into DataMapper itself. So if you look in DataMapper more, you'll see like act as taggable and stuff like that are actually built in. You have state mesh and built in into DataMapper. So most of the stuff you're going to need with Rails already exists in the Merb world. So
Yeah, and I just want to like say one more thing about that. Like, even though like I'm sure Merb's looking super wicked right now, if you got an app that's running good in Rails, my suggestion is to keep it in Rails. You know, there's nothing wrong with it unless you're getting into the edge case and you're fighting it. Like, yeah, it's nice to get some of these performance payoffs, but unless those performance payoffs are going to benefit you in a big way, I'd probably reconsider making that change. Okay, thank you very much.